In this episode, we're talking all about what kind of tracing paper to use with your sewing patterns. Welcome to the Sewing Report. I'm Jennifer Moore, helping you discover your love of sewing. There's been a product I've been wanting to try for a while now. I first heard about it in a Facebook group, and I was pretty psyched to get some of it myself, and it is called Swedish tracing paper. Now, there's all kinds of different paper and materials you can use to trace sewing patterns onto, and that's if you want to maybe grade your sewing pattern or if you want to keep the original tissue intact. A lot of people will use like medical grade, like exam table paper. This is actually a roll of Bienfang tracing paper. I got it, I think it's like a 50-yard roll, but it's getting to the end, so I thought it would be worth a shot to try something different. And now, all of these products can be found pretty easily on Amazon, and I will link them below. So the thing about Swedish tracing paper that apparently is great is that it's sewable. So you can trace your pattern pieces onto it and then sew them together, in theory eliminating the need for a muslin. So we're going to test it out. I'm going to try it and see how it compares to the tracing paper. This is a little pricier than the tracing paper, because this is only a 10-yard roll and this is like a 50-yard roll, but this roll is wider, so you can get more of your pattern pieces onto a smaller section. And also you don't have to like tape pieces together if you have a really like a larger pattern piece. So this is Sewable Swedish tracing paper. It's 29 inches by 10 yards. And it says, don't cut your patterns, trace them with this sewable pattern paper. Sew it and try it on before cutting your expensive fabric, which is pretty much why we make a muslin, is to work out any fit issues. And you might be able to, even though this is a little pricier than the tracing paper, maybe it'll save you money because then you're not using fabric to make a muslin. And this says, use it to make a durable master pattern, strong, see-through, and drapably soft. Which I like the idea of this being more like fabric and that it won't rip or tear as easily. So let's get this baby out of the plastic. All right, we'll just get you out of here and we'll kind of compare to see how it looks. All right, there's a little bit of tape holding this together. Let me try to get this off. All right, there's some Scotch tape. All right, I don't know. Let's see if we can get this off. So I'm gonna actually use a small pattern to try it out on. All right, now, all right, this does seem to be kind of, the tape does seem to be taking a little bit of it off. So I wouldn't really recommend trying to put tape on this and then trying to remove it, because it does look like that might not be the best thing. So let's kind of lay these out, and I'm going to use a small pattern. This is the Playgroup Romper by Fresh Stitch Patterns. And I'm going to cut this out and sew it together just to see how it, you know, sews up. And then I'm going to use a seam ripper to try to get the pieces apart. Let's lay these out side by side to kind of compare the opacity. All right, so this is the regular tracing paper and this is the Swedish tracing paper. All right. And both seem relatively translucent, which is a good property for tracing paper, right? All right, and let me put a pattern piece underneath so you can see how it looks. So here is one pattern piece, and I'll put the other one over here just to be able to see how see-through they are. Opacity-wise, these actually seem pretty similar, so you should be able to see your markings pretty clearly and be able to trace the pieces. The paper tears very easily. Let's see if this stuff tears. This stuff tears as well, but it does seem a little more durable in that, like, if you're not trying to rip it, it should be okay. All right, so let me try to, I'm gonna set this aside and we're gonna trace some pattern pieces onto the Swedish tracing paper. To trace patterns, I tend to use the purple side, the air-soluble side of this dual-sided pen, and I'll link it below. I have like 8 of these at a time and they're great. And what I like about this pen is that when you trace your pattern pieces, the markings disappear after a while. So I don't use this for the pattern markings. I'll use the blue side because it doesn't disappear, but for the outside lines that you're just gonna cut away, I tend to use the purple side. All right, so this is the back, and you actually want 2 of these. I'm actually just gonna do one side so you can kind of see how it looks. All right, so we'll do 2 of these. And we'll actually line these up with the ends. Hopefully it'll make things a little easier. Let's try to line you up, and then we're gonna sew one side together and see how well it does with that. Here we go. So we are just going to trace around this side. Oops. And yeah, the markings are very easy to see, so I'm not having any difficulty. And the pen is actually, I'm not having any trouble with the pen. It's definitely good for any sort of writing implements. So let's trace around here. And I'm just sort of doing this as a sample, so it doesn't need to be perfect. And we're just gonna sew this up when we're done. And I do like this material. It's a little more fabric-y, so it kind of feels like interfacing. But hopefully it's a little bit more drapable so that if you're trying to work out fit issues, you can try this on yourself. And yeah, I can definitely see using this as a muslin replacement. It does seem like it would work fine for that. Now this material does feel kind of delicate, but it feels a little bit sturdier than paper. I would liken this to, like, I don't know, like, actually, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of those bibs you get at the dentist, you know, the ones that they put on you, the paper ones. This reminds me of that. This is sort of like a hybrid between paper and fabric, I would say. Not having any trouble with cutting this. So this should be a breeze. But yeah, this definitely reminds me of those paper gowns they give you at the doctor's office or the bibs at the dentist's office. Maybe it's the same stuff. Maybe that's what it really is. Although, if that's the case, just try to find those bibs and then use those instead. Although just make sure to get them in white. I'm working with my trusty Eversewn Sparrow 25. I've got the walking foot on, and I just have your regular old needle in here. So we're just gonna give that a whirl and see how it does. We're just going to sew the shoulder and the side seam just to test it out. I'm just gonna be using a basting stitch just to make it easier to get the stitches out at the end. All right, here we go. Will it sew? Sort of like that segment, can it blend? Remember with the blender? All right, and it does indeed sew. Actually, another material this reminds me of is coffee filters. All right, we got one seam done. Okay, here we go. That definitely sewed up. Let me just get this out. And actually, I don't even know if I'm gonna need a seam ripper. I may just be able to pull the stitches out. It looks pretty easy to do. All right, so I've got the shoulder seam done. Now we're just going to do the side seam, and then that should give us a pretty good indicator of how this performs. Okay, here we go. Just do the side seam here. This was very easy to sew with. I would say, from my initial impression, I wouldn't sew these seams over and over again, but if you're just doing it once or twice, it should be okay and it shouldn't perforate the material. That's what I think. All right, here we go. And just to kind of test that theory, I'm gonna try to sew this back and see what happens when you do that. We'll see what happens. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna sew it back just to see if it like destroys the material or if it stays okay. Okay, so here's my test sample. The seams, okay, that one's coming out a little bit, but that's probably because I missed a few stitches and they're sort of very loosely in place because it's a basting seam. Yeah, I can definitely see using this as a muslin. You could definitely put this on. Like, I could put my finger through here like this. You can definitely put this on and test it out for fit. The seam that I stitched twice is obviously a little more staying in place. But yeah, you can definitely move this around and, you know, it seems to be more fabric-like. And it doesn't, unlike tracing paper, it's not gonna like rip when you try it on. And this is also more durable than doing like a tissue fit. So far, I think the material, now it is wrinkling quite a bit. Like, there we go. Let me try to wrinkle this up and see what happens. It does wrinkle. Okay, here we go. But I imagine you could just hit this with a dry iron and it would probably flatten out a little bit. So, all right, so let's see if we can get the stitches out. Okay. But yeah, I would imagine if you just hit this with an iron, it'd probably be okay. But Yeah, I could definitely see like if you wanted to take this in, then you could work on your fit issues. You could also use these to practice and try out and experiment with darts or other types of techniques. But let me try to get this one row of stitching out. Now this is actually just pulling out without even a seam ripper. It's just like coming out. So that's pretty, so if you're just doing a very loose seam, you really don't even need a seam ripper. And let me just try to tug it to see if it rips. That came out pretty nicely. It didn't rip the tracing paper, which I'm kind of surprised. I thought it was gonna rip. All right, so now let's try this seam that I doubled. Okay, actually this is coming out even without a seam ripper too. So I don't even need one. So this is actually coming out pretty easily. Let me try to pull this. All right, I'm gonna try to pull it to see if it does rip. Okay, so if you do have 2 rows of stitching and then you yank it real hard, it did indeed rip. But you know, if you're kind of careful with this, and you know, if I had used a seam ripper, this would not have happened. But I think because I had gone over this with 2 rows of stitching, it did somewhat perforate the fabric. This is honestly the first time I've ever used this material, so this is a true first impressions video. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what it's like to work with and how it handles. And obviously 2 rows of stitching, if you yank it, it will tear the material. But overall, I would say this is more durable than tracing paper, but less durable than fabric. So it's a bit of a hybrid between fabric and paper. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video with my little review and demo of the Swedish tracing paper. If you'd like to see more product reviews, I've done quite a few of them, and I will link to the playlist. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that thumbs up button and feel free to subscribe to the Sewing Report for much more. I will see you next time.